There are legends of people with the gift of making reviews so true they conjure spirits from the past and the future. Let's talk about Sinners.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. We are back, the Eye of the Storm podcast. So, today we are going to be reviewing Sinners. Now, before we get into that, you already know what time it is. It's movie recommendation time. So, guys, what's the best recent thing that you've seen?
So I actually watched The Woman in the Yard after the recommendation from Daniel and the team. It was one that I initially was kind of not happy I missed, but just one that I was like, okay, I don't mind not seeing that one. But I'm about halfway through the movie, and I feel like the movie just does so many things really, really well in terms of letting us know what's going on with the family without necessarily having to tell us. There's a lot of things implied by the way that the characters interact with one another, by the way things that they're just doing or things that they're just eating, etc. That just adds a level of understanding to the characters, who they are, what the situation is that they're in, whilst then having this horror element lurking in the background, and you're just sort of trying to navigate this family dynamic whilst there's this perceived threat outside the house. For me, it was great. I was fully immersed. I was fully involved with the characters. The only reason I stopped watching it was because I was kind of like half watching it online, and didn't have time to sort of finish it. But it's one that I'm very much looking forward to how it concludes and how it wraps up its story. But yeah, no, Woman in the Yard. I was very impressed with the opening and how it was building some attention and building the characters that we were following.
And once you've finished it, let us know what you thought about the ending, because there's some controversy surrounding that, and that's kind of the punchline.
Mhm.
And yeah, I'm just curious what your take on that is when you've seen the whole thing.
I watched The Occupant on Netflix, which was pretty good. Guy ends up moving out of his nice flat house-ish in Spain because him and his family are going broke. Then the new occupants of that house, he ends up spying on them and ends up befriending the husband and just ruins his life and pretty much substitute, which ends up him pretty much. Well, let me not spoil it, but he just ends up ruining his life and ends up taking his life as well, but not in the way that you think. So, yeah, man. Overall, I think it was definitely dread at times seeing the lengths that he was going to, not intentionally to ruin his life, but because obviously they moved into the house that he loved so much. So unfortunately, he's not collateral. That's not really the right word to use, but he was in the way of him pretty much getting the life that he wants. And a lot of people unfortunately suffered during this process. So I think overall it was definitely a good movie, which I would recommend you guys to go and see.
So the best thing I watched is Romy and Michelle's High School Reunion, which is a 1997 comedy film about these two women who are living in Los Angeles. They're kind of drifting from one party to the next, kind of not without kind of a worry in the world. And then they get the invitation to their 10-year high school reunion and realize they have nothing to show for it. And so they spend a week trying to fix their lives, and that doesn't work. So they decide to go to the reunion pretending to have invented the post-it note in order to impress their old high school friends. And that obviously does not go well. And then kind of things escalate from there. And the whole thing is basically like this. It's this very 90s, very colorful, very poppy kind of comedy that is really carried by the performances of these two lead actresses, right, who play Romy and Michelle. And it's like a very kind of pretty standard story about don't let yourself be defined by your material success. Don't let yourself be defined by expectations of other people. And it's kind of using the high school reunion as a vehicle for that idea. But then on top of that, they hang like likable characters and an interesting story, lots of very quotable lines, and it's just all around a good time. And it gets quite weird towards the end, and it's just 90s craziness and just a lot of fun. The message is something pretty basic, but it takes it to some fun places, and it's an enjoyable movie to watch.
Looks like it's time for the main event. Sinners. Daniel, please give the people a quick synopsis of the film.
So Sinners is a period horror film about these two brothers who live in 1930s Mississippi during the Jim Crow era. They've been away for 7 years, traveling the world, making money, and they've had some success. And they return to their hometown in order to open up a juke joint for their community, and they're trying to invest back into their community now that they've had success. That then attracts the attention of vampires who are trying to crash that party, and events unfold from there. So what did we think of Sinners?
I thought that this film. Okay, so even though there's a lot of controversy, well, no, I don't know if there's a lot, but from what I'm seeing, there is a lot of controversy around this film, especially when it comes to my fellow brothers and sisters in Christ. That being said, which I will obviously speak about, because I don't know if that's true or not, because there's a lot of interpretations about this film, and that's what this film is about. Like a lot of interpretations, there's a lot of messaging behind it, symbolism. It's just, it feels like a lot is going on. However, overall, I will say that this film is looking like it's going to be the best film of 2025. And I'm very surprised. I wasn't expecting it. I honestly wasn't expecting it. I'm going to go watch it again this week because I want to really see if the controversy is true. But besides that, in terms of like my first viewing experience, I'll be honest with you, I was mesmerized. The concept of freedom and the way that, it was portrayed as well as Black culture, African culture, and the way, it and like the way that it just revolutionized, and the way that it evolutionized throughout time, and the way that it was just, it was showed and conveyed in 2 hours in a film. It was amazing. I'll be honest with you. Now, of course, there were problems, but overall, that for me was the best vampire film that I've ever seen. There are problems with the film, and the problems are going to be for me, if the whole anti-Christian messaging and symbolism behind this is true. If that's true, then damn. But in terms of just for face value, and obviously, like I said, I didn't see that before. I couldn't tell that was it. That could have potentially been the messaging just from a first time experience, first time viewing it. The movie was amazing.
Yeah, for me, I think I equally loved it as much as you did. I feel like the first 40 minutes to an hour, whilst we're getting familiar with all the characters, the brothers, the you know different people in the town that they've moved back to, so we're getting familiar with their stories, how the brothers' notoriety, is spread around the town, and how they're kind of like feared, revered, respected by some. The different dealings, the way that they really distinguished the two brothers as well. They kind of made it very clear that this one is this particular way, and the other brother had his own life, had his own experiences, had his own way of of maneuvering in this town. I feel like all of that was perfect. All of that was amazing. And then of course we then get to the vampire side of things, and the horror elements of it. And I feel like that's where the movie was probably a little bit weaker in terms of the horror aspect of it. I don't think it was as scary, or the horror elements wasn't as strong in this. And I do feel like the action as well, once we sort of get to the vampire action in this, wasn't as compelling as the movie like this really deserved, because I feel like everything surrounding it was perfect. I feel like there was a lot of stellar performances in this movie as well. I really enjoyed so many of the characters in this particular movie. Of course, the music was great in this as well. And again, there was like a lot of themes, a lot of sort of messaging, a lot of things that you can interpret in many different ways depending on sort of your experiences. And of course, we'll delve into that a little bit more. And I kind of do wish that I did watch it for a second time just to try and pick up on some of the things that I did miss. But I'm sure in the discussion that we'll probably apply some meanings to some things and try to decrypt some of the messaging that was in here. But I just felt like there was a lot of culture and a lot of love put into the cultural aspects of this movie, and I really feel like they really respected. And you can see it as well, because they had a lot of consultants come in for this movie. So they had not just like a twin consultant from Michael B. Jordan to help differentiate the twins, but they had like a hoodoo consultant for the character that had that sort of practiced in the movie. And I can't remember which other ones that they had, but I know that there was like a list. But you can kind of see that they were making sure that they were getting things right in this movie. The things that they were implementing, they were trying to get it right in this movie. So for me, amazing. By far, easily the best movie I've seen this year. It's going to take some beating to beat this movie.
I think I agree that this is probably the best movie of the year so far. It has been a weak first 4 months in this year. but this is definitely going to be up there by the end of the year, I think. Overall, it's just like a very well-made movie. It looks gorgeous. It's greatly acted. You can see how much attention went into every detail, right, from the accents to everything else to the music. So I think it is a really compelling story, and it gives a really strong kind of view into what that time and place was like. I think the acting's great. I think the characters are great. There are a few things I think you need to be aware before you go into this, is that people are saying a lot of things that are not quite accurate about this movie. One of them is that it's not a musical. It's a movie in which music is important, and there are music scenes, but it's not a musical in the way you think. Like a musical is kind of like people singing and there's some plot in between to connect those, and that's not what this is. It's a story in which music is important in a number of different ways. It's also not very much a classical vampire movie, in the sense that it does not follow a lot of the tropes. It evokes some of the lore, and some of that it does better than others. But it's not like, it takes a while before the vampires show up, and it's not really about vampires. I think there's a metaphor going on here. After I've been thinking about this for a day, I'm still not entirely sure I figured out the metaphor. And for once, I'm going to reserve judgment and say it might be that I'm just not getting it. That's I think more likely than not in this case, and hopefully that that falls into place as I think more about this movie. But the vampires serve a very specific purpose in a metaphor, and they're not there. They don't serve the same function as they normally do in vampire movies, and they use different pieces of vampire lore to kind of support that metaphor. And for the most part, that works really well. It's also sold as a horror movie, and it's not all that scary. Like, in the sense that, like, in the way a normal horror movie is. The vampires are creepy and threatening and intimidating, but it's a lot more about, and we'll get into the details of what the metaphor is in the spoiler section, but basically the scariness comes more from what the vampires represent and how they fit into the larger story, as opposed to like being scary, like scaring you, the audience member. So overall, I think it's an excellent movie. It's definitely, like, even if I ended up not liking one or two little details, it's very clear that this was deliberate. This was exactly the movie Ryan Coogler wanted to make, and he's very good at what he does. And this is a proper movie. Let's talk about it.
Let's go off your point that you made earlier about the purpose of the vampires. So what do we think they represented, and the symbolism behind them was, and especially the main the main guy, the main vampire, who was Irish? What do we think? What was going on there? Why do you think that all of that was incorporated in the storyline?
Should I just go through what I think the metaphor is?
Yeah.
All right. So I think one thing that's really central in this movie is that music defines communities and holds them together. This community that we're seeing, places like the Juke Joint, are kind of the cornerstone of their communities. It's kind of what kind of informs and shapes the identity and identities that people have. The movie tells us twice that some people are capable of playing music that is so powerful that it transcends space and time, right? And our main character, or one of the main characters, Sammy, is one of those people, right? So when he starts singing and playing the blues, like, we see kind of not only the community all coming together, but past, future, and present generations all coming together psychically. And I think that scene was really probably the most impressive. Like, I really like the vampire designs, and especially when they really vamp out. That was my kind of vampire. But in terms of just filmmaking, there's this several minute long scene where Sammy plays the blues and sings, and it's shot as if it's one shot, right? And it kind of just pans around the crowd, and kind of just people fade in and out, and like the ancestors manifest and the descendants manifest going into our time, right? The only thing I was missing, that it goes into the future, but that's not a real complaint. Like, you can see kind of how we basically see a culture existing, right? Like, it transcends both space and time, right? And the music is what holds everything together. And then the vampires show up, and they have their own music. But it's notable that the vampires basically offer freedom, right? They offer freedom from all the problems and limitations and pain of the world that people live in, and in favor of this utopian, egalitarian community, like almost like a commune that transcends all boundaries and all distinctions, right? First of all, they have a master, right? They're not all equal. There's definitely a master there. And then when they play their music, it's the master's music. They're not playing all their songs. They're playing the Irish folk song, which I understand has all this history, And there's a connection between Irish folk music and blues in a way that I don't really understand. Have not looked up the history of that. So that is there. But notably, when the vampires sing their songs, it is the master's song. And I think that's really important because that's kind of the first really big clue that when they talk about what they're offering, they're lying. It is another form of servitude that they're offering. I think that's really important. And so the story is essentially about Sammy being offered this. He's kind of being given kind of an easy way out in a way. All he has to do is not resist, and then all his problems go away. At least that's what the vampires say. And we're kind of shown that this is a lie, that it's just another form of servitude.
You can also kind of like tie it into the music business as well, and this is where there's like so many themes or so many messaging that you can pull from one thing in this movie in terms of, you can also see it as, they've heard Sammy and they're there specifically for Sammy because Sammy's got this powerful voice and Sammy is this great talent. And again, they're promising him all of these things. They're promising, an easy life, just kind of like you said, this life where race doesn't matter, culture doesn't matter, this, that, and the other. And they're trying to welcome him into that. And it's almost like predatory because, like you said, it's all a bit of a facade. It's all a bit of a lie because at the end of the day, there is the master, and the only person that's really benefiting from that is the master, and he's got his kind of whole grand plan into that. And it's important that they came there specifically for Sammy, and they kind of like picked up whatever on the way to try to make him not like a little bit more comfortable, but to try to make it a little bit more acceptable. Like, oh, look at all your other people that are also here with us. Look how much fun they're having, and it's almost like they're representations of other maybe lesser artists that have had good deals, or they've maybe improved their lives or their circumstances by joining or by assimilating to what Remick was selling in his speech. And then Sammy's the one that they actually truly want. Sammy's like the golden goose, the golden egg. And it kind of like, as that was playing out, I kind of was just feeling that from there. And the fact that they were playing Irish folk music, it was almost a case of, once they have your talent, once they, have you for what you were good at initially, they then want to then manipulate your sound or manipulate what you're producing to make it fit a little bit more into what they want, to make it fit what the machine wants to then put out to the masses, make it a little bit more acceptable to other people. So I kind of got that from that as well, and I'm sure there's loads of other ways that it could also be interpreted, how the vampires were. Or for me, it was more that specific scene. I feel like the whole vampire element of it, I think you're correct in that. There's this like correlation, or there's this link between the Irish folk and the way that they were treated, and also the Black experience as well. And there's a lot of like parallels and correlations there. Again, I'm not as well read up as I probably could be on that, so I don't want to delve too much into that, but I do believe that there is an intentional link there.
I don't think you need to read very deeply into this. I didn't look up when the Republic of Ireland was founded, but it was either not yet in 1932 or had just happened. So at this point, being Irish, he would have been a subject of the British Empire for 200 years, and either was in the process of becoming independent or had just become independent. So there is a little bit of a connection there, right? Like in terms of two groups that have not been in charge, if we put it mildly, right, in recent history. So there's definitely a connection there. And then it's notable that the master who's trying to manipulate them comes from that background.
I definitely agree with what you're both are saying. And I think this the messaging behind this is so multi-layered that it makes it a bit difficult because, like, for example, going off what Hervé was saying, he's pretty much, Sammy's talent pretty much attracted, supernatural attention and culture vultures. Literally, that's what it is, like in the music industry, right? So he is right about that. But I also saw like the vampires. I saw them as like a form of gentrification when it comes like to like white people on Black culture.
But they weren't all white is the thing.
No.
They were everybody.
No. But
and the first victims are the clan members, right?
No, no. But the first they were, but this is where it gets a bit. I wouldn't say convoluted, but it gets a bit hard to explain because at first all three of them are white, right? So even though the first victims were white, however, they were on his program. So this is where it's interesting because the Irish song that they played, apparently that's like everything I felt like was intentional. So the specific Irish song that they played, that was a song of oppression. So that kind of made me feel like, okay, so his first victims were the white Americans which kind of
Specifically clan members. They weren't just random. Specifically clan
yeah. So
members.
it's like they both were his enemies, but they were like, as in like the Americans and the black people. It's like they were his enemies in terms of history. They were his enemies, but at the same time. So this is where it gets a bit confused. Sorry, this is where it gets a bit confusing because I do believe like the vampires did represent gentrification, right? And like the outcome of what happens when you let outsiders. I don't, well, I don't feel like this way, but I'm saying what I felt like the message was the outcome of what happens when you let outsiders into black culture, right? Especially with, you know what I'm saying? But that's why. However, at the same time, the song that they played, I forgot what it's something about Dublin. I forgot what the actual Irish song is called, but the Dublin song that shows that the Irish struggle kind of links to obviously the black struggle in America because I think, like you said, Daniel, the song was a representation of how the English was oppressing obviously the Irish in England. So that's why I'm feeling like
In Ireland.
in Ireland. So that's
Yeah.
why I'm a bit confused because I don't necessarily understand what exactly is the main message. I see different messaging, like I said, oppression, culture vulture, gentrification, kind of same thing. But at the same time, like I said, I don't know what the main message is. I don't know who the main enemy is. Because you know, vampires, right? Their seduction is one of their main characteristics. So that's exactly what they did. Like they'll seduce you, they'll love bomb you to the point where you're on their side, and that's exactly what he was doing. But I don't like. It doesn't feel like he has an enemy. I'm trying to understand because I know what his goal was, but what is his like? What was the
So
message behind his
the
goal?
goal was to kind of co-opt and absorb Sammy's music, right? And the
Yeah,
music is the culture. So he was trying to co-opt or absorb the culture in some way, right? See, as I was watching it, I thought this was about like revolutionaries, like people who promise a utopia and then deliver the exact opposite, right? So like they make all these promises about how if you join us, all your problems will go away. We're gonna burn it all down together and then kind of rule the new world. But all you have to do is kind of submit to my will and give up all your agency and just do what I say because I know best. Like that's what revolutionaries and cult leaders say, right? That doesn't quite illuminate kind of the metaphor, right? And then the thing that really sticks out in all of this is the after credits scene where it's 60 years later, Sammy has had a full life. He's had a career. He's a legendary blues singer. And then Stack and Mary, like the two vampires that survive the battle, show up and offer him, like, give him one last chance at immortality. And he turns it down. But their offer seems, at that point, seems kind of genuine. So this whole idea that the vampires are lying about what they're offering and that they're really just like offering another form of servitude, I don't know, like it seems kind of contradicted by the last scene. But at the same time, I think there's enough clues that Remick, the vampire master, like that what he is doing is definitely not honest. Like is and you know it's kind of a clue that in order to kind of join them, you first have to die and you have to become their food, right? Like that's already not terribly mutually respectful, right? Like it's not like it's not starting off on good terms. So that's already kind of a start that there's something up with what they're offering. That's the part where I'm not entirely clear on what the metaphor exactly is, because a lot of the signs point to what we've been saying, right? That this is kind of trying to co-opt or undermine or absorb Sammy's culture, but then there's like little pieces where they seem to be genuine. Specifically, having like lived good lives outside of society. And that's kind of a vampire trope that vampires exist outside of the norms of society, and that's kind of their appeal. And that is why being a vampire is appealing to people who are not being given a fair shake in society, right? For whom society does not allow just play by the rules and you'll have a good life. Like traditionally, like vampires recruit from ranks where that is the case, or from communities where that is the case.
No, yeah. When it comes to the vampires in this, they definitely like one message which is clear is the concept of freedom and what they represent when it comes to that. And I feel like that is so fitting with the times that they're in. How did you
Specifically,
guys
false
feel?
freedom, right?
Yeah, exactly. So how did you guys feel about, the way, with the concept of freedom that it was conveyed in this film? Do you think it worked? Do you think there was anything that you thought was a bit, it didn't really work too well for you? What are your thoughts?
I feel like one aspect of it was Sammy, and his sort of struggle with freedom because again he was the son of a preacher who wanted him to use his musical talent in the church and to sort of sing songs of worship, etc. And it seemed like he was trying to break free from the shackles of that. And I feel like the movie drew a really good parallel between his father as a preacher and Remick as a vampire. And I feel like that's probably where some of the some of the negative takes come from about some of the Christianity aspect of it. You can almost see, and I know his father wasn't in this movie a whole lot, but you can almost see the parallel between sort of Remick and his father, and that's kind of why the scene at the end is really powerful when he's holding onto the guitar, because after his experience of going out there and singing and sort of the horrors that came with it, the horrors that his father predicted would come, when he said if you sing too much, you might, the devil may come, and the devil actually did come. It almost felt like both of them were sort of offering him up some level of servitude, some level of sort of constriction on what he was able to do, and sort of putting some shackles on how he was to use his musical talent in this. And like you said about the theme of freedom in this, is that and where the parallels come is that, again, once he naturally after the horrors he's experienced and after all the nightmares that he's had on that particular night, his natural instinct is to go back to the church and to go back to his father. But it was just interesting because at first I didn't get it, why he held onto the guitar and then why he ran away. But after thinking about it for a while, it was just that level of though there may be sort of horrors, and though there may be sort of bumps and bruises on the road that he wants to pursue, it's better for him to have that freedom to live the life and to explore the life that he wanted to live, as opposed to either being in the shackles of Remick or being restricted and confined by, I wouldn't say like rigidness, because I don't want to be like disrespectful, or I don't want to be rude, but kind of the way of life and the strict structure that comes with being Christian and living a Christian life, and obviously being the son of a preacher as well. It was just fascinating to see how that played out, because again, at the start of the movie, it wasn't quite clear the importance of his father and the importance of that relationship to his mindset and to his psyche. It was almost like we've seen the story a thousand times, and there's many famous historical singers where they were originally gospel singers. They were singers in the church, but then switched it up and went down the rhythm and blues path, and again, many examples of it. And at first you kind of think it's just another example of it, but the movie then put Sammy on this journey for him to properly realize, okay, maybe this isn't the life that I want to live, and maybe I want to have that level of freedom, that level of control over his life, again, no matter what it comes with.
So this is kind of where the metaphor gets a little bit, I don't want to say muddled, because muddled implies that it doesn't work and doesn't make sense. But this is kind of where I get confused. So one of the things that the church is right about in this movie, and that is pretty much the only thing they're right about, is that the music attracts the devil, right? Or like in the form of the vampires, right? But also in the metaphor, the music is the culture. And so the church ostensibly provides community and meaning and protection and all of that, but they do nothing against the vampires, right? The Indians do more against the vampires than the church does. They warn against the music. The father asks Sammy multiple times to put away his guitar, right? And in the end, Sammy chooses the guitar over his father and over the church, right? So there seems to be like a contradiction here, where they kind of warn against evil, but half of that evil is the culture that's being celebrated in the movie, and they also don't offer any solutions against the evil, right? And in the end, Sammy wins, essentially, or has this good ending by walking away from what they have to offer. And you kind of alluded to kind of the historical backgrounds in this. And I think I'm going to make myself a little bit unpopular with where I'm taking this argument with you guys, but the reason they are Christian is because of the slave trade, right? That religion was imposed on them by the masters, by the slavers. Yeah. And the religion that is celebrated in the blues scene, in this montage, is kind of the traditional animist African religion. And it's the European Christianity that is trying to lead people away from that and asks them to throw it away. Am I reaching? Or is that kind of what they're saying?
I kind of agree.
No, I don't
Yeah,
think
I
I
was gonna
ever
say
watched it.
I kind of feel you on that, and I feel like it
I
was very clear in this movie that I think there was several characters that referenced that the Christianity that they practiced was the white man's Christianity, and it wasn't sort of their religion. I feel like that's probably why they had the emphasis on the character that practiced hoodoo in this because it showed the roots, it showed
That's what actually helps,
yeah
right? That has
exactly.
the actual answers.
That's why I disagree with the messaging. That's not with your point. I was like the message because if that's what he was trying to convey, then that's where for me I'm like, okay, hold on, because I remember I watched an interview where he was talking about a guy called, was it Papa Lemba or something like that? But this guy is heavy on the voodoo, hoodoo, whatever you call it, right? And I think there was a guitar player that they were referring to who pretty much went to this guy for his musical talents in exchange for his soul. And that's
There
literally
are stories of like blues musicians selling their soul to the devil in order again, like in exchange for talent.
exactly. And that's what, and I do agree that European Christianity is definitely perverted. And I don't, and it is something which I am glad, it is something which I do believe that they did convey in this film, which was good. However, I didn't agree with the whole hoodoo overthrowing and overpowering Christianity. That's why I'm like, okay, now the messaging in this is getting a bit weird to me because that's where it's showing kind of like I kind of have to like when I say I don't draw the line, but I just disagree in general. I just disagree with
But it
it
was more.
because
It was
of
yeah.
from what I believe in with Sammy's representation because everyone what I did everyone in this film's a sinner literally, and I think that's what makes the film kind of good and in terms of like the message because it fits well with obviously the title of the film and it fits well with the message. Everyone's a sinner in their own way, and I think with Sammy because he's the main character, he kind of showed obviously what it was because the scene between him and his father where in the church in the beginning, that scene was kind of like showing okay, I have freedom and I'm going to kind of like choose him. Kind of leaving that church in that scene was kind of like a symbol that okay, he's choosing his obviously with Christianity we all have free what's the word,
Free will.
freedom, we all have free choice, whatever it's called, free will. Yes, we all have free will. So his character and his role and his story kind of like shows, for me it showed the outcome of what happens when you follow sin. And what reinforces that is the mid-credit scene with Michael B, where he says where he felt the most free, the best moment of his life, where he felt the most free. That was before the sin. That was before, no, that was before the outcome of the sin. Even same with obviously Michael B, like the twin, where he says where he felt the best and where he felt the most free was when he saw the sun come out. But that was obviously before the madness was going on. So I think with Sammy's representation, it kind of showed the outcome of sin from in what kind of happens when you let the devil in, and what happens when you choose free will, when you make the wrong decision with the free will that you're choosing.
I feel like
Stuff.
what they were trying to do in here, especially with making the distinction between voodoo and hoodoo, because voodoo has strong negative connotations attached to it. And it's kind of attached to things like witchcraft, etc. Whereas hoodoo was shown to be more positive. It was shown to be more healing, and you see that scene where she's helping out the little girls and she's taking the fake money because she's serving her community. And she's putting that above everything else. And I feel like a lot of the messaging in this movie as well was about how you protect your culture and how you how you serve your culture. Also ties into the whole music montage about the influence and the importance of culture throughout. So for me, it kind of made sense why they had Hoodoo be the one that saved the day in the end, because it was just a representation of where we've been, our ancestors, what was passed down to us, what was important to us in our history, and how retaining that. Essentially, the movie kind of almost had it as like the benefit of retaining that was that they understood the threat, and they understood, in this movie anyways, they understood the dangers that they were facing because of the knowledge that they had through the hoodoo practice, whereas a lot of people in there probably had knowledge of Christianity and not knowledge of the church, but all of that was not beneficial to them and not super useful for them in dealing with the dangers and dealing with the risk that was posed by Remick and the vampires in this. So in terms of that messaging of protecting the culture, I loved it in this movie.
But that's the thing though, because like hoodoo is a folk religion, and that's where I question on what Ryan Coogler was actually trying to say. Because, like I said, hoodoo is a folk religion, and the fact that hoodoo won instead of Christianity, if he was trying to say the European version of Christianity didn't work, then I would have been like, alright, cool. However,
Supposed to what version?
Because that's all there is.
Opposed to I was gonna say opposed to what Christianity actually looks like, but in terms of what Christianity actually looks like, do we really even know what Christianity actually looks like? That's the problem. So
Especially to
explore.
slaves that were brought there from Africa that had their own traditions and had
Yeah.
their own practices.
But one thing which is factual though is that hoodoo is a folk religion, so it's not. It has no links to Christianity whatsoever. So that's why I'm like,
Yeah.
that's why I'm had an issue. I'm like, okay, hoodoo works, but Christianity doesn't. So is your messaging that Christianity is
No, but
pretty
it's
much
about no,
a
it's
lie?
it's
Is
it's
what I'm
about culture. It's about our ancestors. It's about kind of what we knew before the slave trade, before people were brought here from Africa. What the culture was, what was common to the people back then. Back to the music scene, you see that in terms of when they're going to the past, they're showing like the African dances and stuff like that. They're showing the ancestry history of what our people were like many years ago and how that's evolved over time. So I don't like yeah, it's kind of a little bit of a slight on Christianity in this movie, and I feel like a few characters reference it, but at the same time, it's championing this was what was practiced. This was something that she picked this up from her mother or her grandmother, as opposed to what she was sold to believe. Essentially, I feel like we've kind of
Yeah.
spent a lot of time speaking on metaphors and themes and this, that, and the other, and I feel like a large part of the movie, at the very start, was just building out some amazing characters and building out a fully fleshed story. And what's crazy is that this was done over the span of one day, basically. Like all the events of the movie was over the span of one day, and I felt like they did enough world building through some of the characters, the interactions, etc., to kind of like make you feel comfortable within this world that they were in. But I don't know what worked for you, because I did see comments that it was a little bit of a slower pace at the start. I'm not sure why people felt that, but kind of actually more for you, Daniel, as well, because I know that you hate when movies just introduce characters for them to just be killed at the end by vampires or whatever threat, etc. But yeah, what was you guys' feelings towards the start and how the characters were introduced and built up in this?
So you'll be shocked to hear that I think the first hour is a bit slow. The reason for it is that I think there's a few different aspects to it. One of them is it's not like the point it's making is not that complex, right? It's basically showing what's this community like, what circumstances are they living under, and what are Smoke and Stack trying to do about it, and why are they in the position to kind of shake things up a little bit, right? And part of that is having made their money in other places, and now they're coming back to the community, and now they want to lift it up a little bit, right? Like by injecting their money into this, and they're trying to help people in this way, right? I thought it made that point a few times too many. Like you could have easily cut a couple of those examples and still had the same effect. And you would still know these characters. You would still know how this community functions. You would still know what circumstances and conditions they live under. But you didn't. Maybe instead of giving 9 examples, you could have done 7. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of what I'm saying. And I think just as one example, in general, just in terms of the storytelling of this, I think it's way too detail oriented in the sense that it throws little pieces at you that slowly build up over time. And I'm not entirely sure. First of all, it's difficult to keep track of all the details. Second of all, I'm not sure all of the details are necessary. One example of this is why was Annie having lost a child? Is that important? Could that have been cut, or is that important enough that this had to be there?
It was important because it gives more depth into the character and it gives us a more.
Sure, but could the story, if you had cut this part, would the story have still functioned, and would it still have made its point? I'm not necessarily thinking on that part. It's more like there's lots of little details like this, or the fact that Smokes and Stack's father was beat them as a child. Is that like if it's important, should it have been more prominent? And if it isn't important, why does it get mentioned a few times? You know what I mean? Like I just have a sense that like some percentage, not most of it, but some percentage could have been cut, and then we could have had more time on the parts that are the most important.
I hear what you're saying, but I think those parts are important for me because it kind of shows the emotional connection that it has between characters, especially between him and Mary. I think that was necessary, especially when it comes to explaining his character and how he came to be, because a lot of gangsters aren't just born evil a lot of the times.
Mm-hmm.
They have a story behind them. So that was his story behind him, especially when it comes to why he's so protective over Spank, one of them. So I think it was definitely necessary, and it was mentioned a few times, but I think it wasn't overdone. I think it was done just right. But I think it was 2 or 3 times where they might have mentioned the child, that they had a kid together. But I personally think that that was necessary. And when it comes to pacing of the film, I think the pacing was just fine. I think I know I've seen a lot of people complain about it as well. I think it did feel like two stories in one, and it did feel like the introduction to the vampires was maybe like 40 minutes into the film. However, I enjoyed it because it engaged me more into the story and and especially when it comes to the characters. I felt like I was getting a backstory to each character, which I enjoyed, which made it more. It felt weighty, if that makes sense. Like the story felt weighty, and I enjoyed that weight, receiving that weight before being introduced to the live event, the main storyline, which is obviously the vampires.
I think I agree with Jonathan. I agree with both of you actually. In terms of, I do feel like they were going into a lot of detail, and they probably could have cut maybe one or two stories, and that there was maybe elements of it that didn't serve the overall narrative. But I find myself enjoying it anyways, just because, like Jonathan was saying, is that you're getting an in-depth background into each of the characters, and it's not like we were introduced to a backed character in this movie. It's like every character that we came across had their own story and had challenges in life and their own depth. From Cornbread, who was working in the field, because at first when I saw the people working on the field, I kind of felt like we were like back in, that we were in the slave period where they were being forced to work in the cotton field.
That was the whole deal with the
Yeah, exactly. But then when he
right?
was like kind of like talking about like he has like a quota to fill with like his master, with his the man that owned the field, it was adding a different context to it, because like when you first see it, you're just kind of like reminded of slavery, but then you then see how that then transformed over time. Of course, it's still not ideal. They're still working in the field barefoot, etc., not the best working conditions, not doing the best jobs or whatever, but you can kind of like see a part of history that I wasn't too familiar with about someone that's actually running the field and is having to fulfill a quota and this, that, and the other. But that's just like kind of like his backstory or whatever. I can't remember Delroy Alindo's character, but he was like the harmonica player or something like that, that they met at the train station before they met Hailee Steinfeld. Even kind of like seeing him, he was a music talent of his time as well, but kind of got lost in the lifestyle and lost in the fame, and kind of like ended up falling in too much in love with the drink. But long kind of story short, without going into all the different backgrounds, is that everyone we were being introduced to just added a nice level of depth and understanding and to the world. Even the Chinese store owners, and then kind of coming to find out that to kind of like help them assimilate and help them settle into America, that they were setting up shops and businesses in the black community, and it was like kind of like homogenous between the two of them. So it was just like fascinating every single time we were coming across new people in this. So that's why I don't begrudge the movie for being a little bit slower and taking a little bit of time. And I feel like, again, there's good and bad ways to do it. And in something like in Abigail, where it was kind of a bit haphazard, and they just kind of like dumped exposition on who the characters were. I feel like this one just took its time to like really make you feel and understand each of the characters and care about them.
My point was less about it's bad and more about like each individual piece is good. It's just, is it too many pieces? That was kind of just my concern.
It probably was too much detail. Maybe one or two could have been cut so that we could have maybe spent a little bit more time on the horror aspect, on the vampire aspect, and actually getting to the Duke joint and how it all unfolded from there.
I'm not necessarily lobbying for more vampire action. I'm just saying, like, if you have fewer pieces, you can spend more on each one. And another one is that one thing that annoyed me a little bit in just how the story was told was they basically run kind of this gauntlet through Black American history, right? And they mention at least a dozen things. So everything from Jim Crow laws to the KKK being officially disbanded but still existing, to wooden nickels, to sharecropping, to they obliquely mention the Tulsa massacre at one point, but they don't explain any of it. Like very few of them. You kind of get what the deal is with the script and with the wooden nickels, but they don't explain very much. So if you didn't already know what these things are, and I'm sure I didn't catch all of them, but I caught maybe 8 or 9 of these, you had no chance. They simply didn't explain it. And you could argue this movie doesn't need to explain it because it's made for an audience that knows these things, but at the same time, it's also supposed to be for a general audience, especially with a $90 million budget, right? This needs to reach a mass audience. And I'm not entirely sure if they shouldn't have explained at least a few of these things more, at least in the sense of showing what their effects are in the story. So, for example, there's the scene where they argue about whether or not the Duke joint should accept the script and the wooden nickels. and they like spend like half a sentence on explaining what they are, but you kind of need to know what the deal is. That basically these workers were kind of paid in not real currency, which created an additional layer of dependence on their employers, right? In addition to having garbage working conditions with no room for advancement, they were also not being paid in money, right? And that is kind of the deal with the script. If you bring that into it, it adds an additional layer, but it's also kind of important to the story. But then they don't really explain it. So if I had to pick something, if I had to pick a fight with Ryan Coogler, this would be it, because I think you can just reduce the amount of stuff a little bit and then kind of show this stuff. You don't need to sit down and dump clunky exposition, but you can spend more time showing what these things mean and what effect they have in the community and how these often are instruments of preventing progress for this community, right?
Yeah.
Even if legally they're free, but de facto they're not really.
I will agree with that. I don't think they did spend much time. Maybe they might have, like during the dialogue scenes, like when they were having conversations, maybe they said a bit, because I think with what's his name?
Was that Delta Slim? Is that him?
Yeah. So yeah, and he had like a conversation with Sammy and Spankwell in the car. So maybe they said a little something about what was going on, especially how he kind of became free. So I think maybe that was kind of like the explanation of some of the, like, you know, the laws that were going on, Jim Crow, etc., etc. However, you are right to the point where they didn't really make it as accessible to a wider audience when it comes to understanding, you know, the backstory.
But I felt like it was enough. Well, to me, anyways, it felt like it was enough, and I felt like it did what it needed to do to serve the story and sort of kind of progress it to where it needed to go. So, like with the example of the script, is that I felt like they just gave enough of sort of an understanding as to, okay, these workers are sort of not being paid properly and they're not receiving, you know, proper currency, and then you then have the debate between the two brothers as to, okay, what's our responsibility with this and how do we then deal with this in this, you know, because again, if we're just accepting it, then you're quickly going to go out of business because it's not proper money, and that's not how the real world works. But then you then have the opposite side of things of like, you're trying to build something for the community, you're trying to do something for your people, and you need to make them feel welcome in a world where they don't feel welcome in many places. You need to have something which they can then kind of claim as their own, which was then kind of like reinforced by when Remick and his gang showed up, and they were like, no, like we can't be letting you in here. You guys are like not one of us. It's just for us, and you know we don't want that kind of trouble in this place. So I feel like for me it was enough in the movie, even with the whole stuff with the KKK. It was subtle. I feel like it was subtle without kind of like, you know, being too heavy-handed in explaining how things operated. But actually, maybe it was towards the end when it was like kind of explaining that it was just like a bit of a killing floor essentially. But I felt like the movie was clever in, you know, in the scene when they're trying to buy the place, and one of the brothers, I can't remember which one, has a sort of look at the floor and says, "Oh, were these like recently cleaned?" Implying that there's been a history of this, a history of sort of, you know, setting up these black folks in this particular sort of, you know, barn, selling them a dream, and then eventually kind of like ripping it away from them, and just sort of killing them because of sort of their race, essentially. So,
see, I interpreted that as there used to be blood on these floorboards.
okay, but again, at that point, it's like for me, it then explains it towards the end of the movie, and then it recontextualizes everything, because if they tell you there and then in that scene immediately, I don't feel like it has that impact, because again, as a person, so I took it as well as like, oh, there was, you know, just blood on the floorboards, but it's then reinforcing that whole message of, even when you're trying to get ahead, even when you're, you know, trying to, you know, build something for your community, there's these outside, you know, agencies or characters that are going to come and try to take it away from you and tear it down. And, you know, even though you're being sold this dream that you're free, really in this world you're not really as free as you think. And again, when they're explaining that if they look at someone for too long, or if they step on someone's shoes, like, you know, the consequences of that as a person that's deemed to be free, I feel like the movie, the movie then, you know, provides that context. So then you also kind of go on that journey in that movie with the characters, and then you kind of see and you understand the oppression a little bit more once it's sort of, you know, once it's fully realized. So I don't feel like they could have explained it there and then in that one scene what was actually kind of going on, but they implied it enough for the people that were in the know on that particular scene, and then explained it for the rest of the audience towards the end of the movie.
It is a spectrum where some things get more explanation than others. For example, they don't explain sharecropping at all. if I hadn't known that from previous reading, I would have
Yeah.
had no idea what that
I
meant.
can agree with that.
Another one is the Mississippi Chinese. The history of that, I didn't know very much about this. I knew there was Chinese immigration in that area in that time, but I didn't really know how they fit into kind of like the racial kind of belief system, and how they kind of broke the system a little bit by not fitting into the binary that the system was built on in that region and so on. They don't really explain that, right? Like I've seen westerns before with like the Chinese shopkeeper, right? But here it's got a special like a special connotation, and they don't explain that one at all, for example. And part of why I'm kind of latching onto this is that we just talked about incantation just a few weeks ago, and that kind of has this layered approach where the absolute basics are outright explained to the audience, and then there are additional layers, and the higher layers you can only get if you studied Buddhism, and there's some in between which you can get with some context and so on, right? So it is possible to kind of make sure that everybody gets the basics, and then there's more stuff the more you know, the more you bring into the movie. So I don't think it would have been impossible. And I'm not saying he should, like Ryan Coogler should have made a movie like that, like should have made that kind of movie. I'm just saying you are drawing attention to this time period, and a whole bunch of people who have not read very much about it are going to watch it. Wouldn't you want to learn them just a little bit? Don't turn it into a history lesson, but have them walk away something they didn't know before. I don't know. I don't think it would have made the movie worse or would have derailed the project or anything. And if I had to kind of find something to really criticize, it would be that, because maybe that's a little bit of a missed opportunity.
A counter argument to that, I think now some might call this lazy writing, but I think maybe this film pushes you to do more research. It pushes you to want to find out more. So maybe that's why he didn't include certain information which, a lot, like, a wider audience wouldn't know but should know. Because like you mentioned the point about the whole Asians being within obviously like the whole black community, I had no idea about it. That's why when I first saw it, I was thinking just doing it for casting purposes, just for inclusion, or like what's the reason behind that. So I do agree.
And it's really not. The history is really, really interesting. You won't get that from this movie.
Exactly. And I do agree with you to an extent. However, like throughout the film, it's all about messaging and symbolism, and it has us questioning, has a bunch of people online giving their interpretations of the film, and obviously as well as people doing their own research as to what this could mean, So maybe that could have been an intention to the point. It could have been intentional where he wants us to find, just do our research onto certain subject matters and topics. Some may say, "Oh no, that's just he was just a lazy writer. He didn't include it, whatever." But others may see it, from that angle as well. So
if we're gonna call Ryan Coogler anything, it's not lazy.
Definitely not. I'm just saying when it comes to that point.
There's one more counter argument I have to that, and that is this is a $90 million movie. This needs somewhere in the neighborhood of $200 million to break even. And if you want to see more movies like this, you want this to make a profit. And that means it has to appeal to more than just a niche audience, right? This can't just be for people who like are really into Black American history. This has to be enjoyable to a wider audience. And I think for the most part it is. I'm just saying that would be an additional motive to make this stuff just a little bit more accessible. And this movie goes out of its way to not be, right? Like, even just down to the accents and the dialogue. Like, I got most of it, but there's the occasional line I didn't get because the accent was too unfamiliar to me. And I'm not saying they shouldn't have done this. I'm not saying any one piece is a mistake or anything like that. I'm just saying accessibility has got to be a factor when you are making a movie of this scale that needs this level of success, especially if you want more like this. There's a whole bunch of discourse right now about how this made $60 million in the first weekend, which is really good for an R-rated horror movie with an almost all-black cast. This is normally not a $60 million opening movie, right? Also no franchise, no nothing. It's just an original story that appeals to a whole bunch of people, but it's apparently not enough. Because like it's hard to see how this gets over 200 million, and I hope it does. Maybe this is getting really good word of mouth, so maybe over the next couple of weeks it will get there, but it might not, right? 200 million is a pretty high bar for a movie like this, for anything that's not an MCU movie, right? Or like a Tom Cruise movie or something like this, right? So I hope it does, right? But this is like a consideration.
Yeah, they will definitely have like a knock-on effect especially when it comes to like how studios approach movies, like just black movies in general. At the end of the day, it's a business, and I know a lot of people want to see more black movies, but people have to remember this is a business. So if a specific kind or type of film isn't bringing in the money, then of course there is like reasons as to why certain black movies don't generate enough money. reasons such as marketing is not receiving much push behind the film, etc., etc. However, just in general, people have to remember, this is still a business at the end of the day. If something's not generating money, then they're not going to, pour money into it. So that's why I do hope that this film does end up reaching that 200 million mark. So then, the knock-on effect, hopefully, where a lot of more independent, Black creators will be given chances and will be given the big budgets to, create, Black stories. So.
What were your kind of highlights, favorite moments from the movie?
So I'm a big vampire nerd. So this flavor of vampire is right up my alley. Even though the metaphor doesn't resonate really with me, just the way they looked, the way they behaved, the way they talked, it's all very cool. When the master really kind of shows his true nature and confronts Sammy, I think that is quite something. When the master goes up in flame because the sun rises, looks very cool. So just on that level, just as an isolated moment, that is something where I said, yeah, this is very cool. When Smoke hires this little girl and teaches her economics, and kind of like she probably learned, like that's probably her life's most valuable lesson. Like that's kind of how it came across. Like this is probably going to be something that's sick with her and it's going to benefit her for the entire life, and that encapsulates how he views the community, I think, because he thinks he has moved on to something better and is now coming back to lift them up. I think that's kind of the vibe I got from it, and that is kind of encapsulated in his interaction with the girl who he hires to be to stand guard.
It kind of then ties into the two people that he then shoots, because he coming from that background, I probably understands that they're in a desperate situation, has to shoot them to maintain his reputation, but then makes a deal with the Chinese store owner, the woman, to take care of them and actually patch them up, because he knows that they don't have the funds for it, and he knows that that's probably going to make their life a lot more difficult. So again, it's him being in a position to kind of give back to his community and putting his community first in that situation. So yeah, definitely love that scene. The one that I really liked as well, was when we first hear Sammy sing in the car when he's with Stack, and just his face when he realizes that Sammy is a phenomenal singer, and he's kind of like hollering and raving about how much money they're going to make. Because I think it took me by surprise as well. So I didn't hear any of the music or any of the singing in the trailers or anything like that. So when he sang, I was equally as blown away, and I felt like Michael B. Jordan's sort of reaction to him singing in that scene was just like perfect. So I think that was one of my highlights as well, along with Cornbread when they were recruiting. I think that was just like a funny scene when they were recruiting Cornbread, and the whole spiel with his wife. I don't want to spoil the pod, but kind of when he's like, oh, come make this money so you can like F your wife, basically, and this and the other. So yeah, that was another one.
I think what's surprising for me after actually thinking about this, I'm not a big fan of musicals, even though this is not a musical. So it's surprising for one, but to say all the music scenes were my highlight scenes. The scenes that you guys mentioned, 100%. Like I understand the significance, and they were definitely like one of my favorite scenes too. However, I think my favorite scenes were all of the music scenes. The Irish dancing.
That was funny. Actually, seeing like Michael B. Jordan and all that doing like the Irish dancing, and then that was cool.
That was amazing. It just showed how like that scene was so significant with me. It showed how they were all under his, like how the Black community were under his spell, and like they were they thought they were free, but they're still slaves to him at the end of the day. So I was like, damn. Like they're all, you know what I'm saying? So they're not really free at all. Even, you know what I'm saying? Even though they were promised freedom, they weren't. They were lied to. And that's what happens when you kind of like follow the devil. The devil will promise you something, but in reality, it's not what it is. It's, you're still, you know what I'm saying? You're still going to be shackled. You're still going to be chained. And that's the times that they were living in. So for me, it was all of the music scenes. And I'm so surprised because, like I said, I'm not a musical fan. I freaking hated the Joker too. And like I said, I get this is not a musical, but for me to say the musical scenes were, my favorite parts of the movie. Whose was your favorite performance in this film?
I mean, Michael B. Jordan is another level, right? I actually didn't know he was going to play two roles.
Yeah.
And it took me a few minutes before I said, yeah, this is the same guy, isn't it?
Yeah.
I just don't look at cast. Like, obviously, Michael B. Jordan's name is all over this. Yeah. So I knew he was in this. And I've seen in a few other things, he's always great. But I don't read the cast list or anything, right? So obviously they're supposed to be twins, although again, when they buy the barn, they say they're cousins. I'm not entirely sure why, like what the subtext of that was.
I think did
that mean anything?
Just kind of mocking a little bit. I think that's kind of how I see it. Yeah, I think they were just mocking. Yeah.
All right, so but but like they look slightly different, they act slightly different, but same guy, right? So I think pulling that off, like we just saw Alto Nights, Robert De Niro does the same trick, worked much worse than it did here. So I think this is an achievement. Actually playing two roles that are actually different, but in a way, but they're not just different. They're clearly brothers who have gone through a lot together, but they're not the same person, and so they're similar but different, and it's very nuanced and very detailed. And that's an accomplishment. Like, if he doesn't get an Oscar for this, like, I don't care about the Oscars. I think they're all nonsense. But if anybody's gonna get an Oscars for best lead, it's got to be Michael B. Jordan for this, right?
Yeah, I agree. I think this was the role for me that showed that there's definitely layers to his performance, because a lot of people mention his performance in the movie
Fruitvale Station.
Fruitvale
Station, yeah.
Which it was amazing. But I always used to feel with Michael B that he was like a good performer. I wouldn't say he had like one tone or one level to him. He had a few, but it wasn't as diverse as this one. This one showed that he's got layers and bass and different ranges to what he can do and how he can act. So I definitely will agree. Like, I didn't even want to say Michael B. I was trying to think of everyone else. Another one was, I keep forgetting his name, but
Delta.
he played the drunk guy.
Delta Slim.
I keep forgetting his name. Delta. He was definitely the comedic tone that was needed in this film. That guy, he
was
killed
so
it.
tragic.
Huh?
He's the guy who's been beaten down all his life.
Exactly.
More than anybody else.
Sure.
When he talks about why he doesn't want to take the gig because this is by better opportunity, but he has something that's good enough and he can't risk that because he doesn't know if he will get another one like it. That speaks volumes, right?
100%. That's actually a good thing that you mentioned. But yeah, he was second. I was debating between him and Michael B. But I think because playing two roles, like playing, two characters, it isn't easy. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, for me, I'm gonna have to give it to Michael B. in second.
I think Michael B. and Ryan Coogler are becoming a really great 1-2 punch. And I know there's a bunch of directors that always cast certain people in their movies, and I feel like they haven't missed so far. Like, everything that they've sort of worked on together has just been amazing. And I feel like, long may it continue, because again, we kind of briefly touch on, getting more Black stories and getting more sort of diverse Black stories. And of course, this is still centered around, parts of our history where, you're feeling the after effects of slavery, etc. But, with the critical success with this and with the work that they're putting out and the level of care that they're putting into the work, hopefully they're just like pushing barriers and sort of opening doors to more people to have the same opportunities to put out films like this. But that's just like a word, but that's just kind of like a big congrats to both of them. But yeah, I agree with you. Michael B. was definitely one of the strongest performance in this, but there were literally, I can't think of a bad performance, from Hailee Steinfeld to, Delta Slim in this, Cornbread small part. I don't know why he stuck with me so much, but Cornbread small part in this was amazing. Obviously, the guy that played Sammy, the guy that played Sammy, this is his first role, if I understand. This is his first role as an actor. I feel like he did, an amazing job. I just felt like it was just oozing talent all throughout, and they all did a great job.
What's the other actress's name? I agree with you. What's the other actress's name? Mary, that played Mary?
That's Hailee Steinfeld.
No, sorry, the other one. Mike, the other Smokes lover.
She's great. She's great as well.
What was her name?
Annie.
Yeah, she was amazing. She.
That was another highlight scene, man. And so I was gonna say, I know this metaphor was like, right on the nose, but in the scene where she's kind of like nursing the baby and Michael B. Jordan's been shot and he's like, you're kind of like waiting for him to die and go to the afterlife and be with his family. That whole, put out the smoke before you can hold the baby. You don't want to get smoke. You don't want to get smoke on the baby. And obviously his name was Smoke and he was obviously like smoking a cigarette or whatever, but you don't want to get, some of the negative aspects on you and pass it down to your baby. I just felt like that was like a nice little fun like metaphor that they threw in there, and it was just a nice touching moment. It got to me.
Also, this is a movie you're not just supposed to like. A movie you can actually like. There are certain movies that are deemed like culturally important, and you're kind of supposed to like them. And like this is actually one that is actually incredible. Right? It's actually top tier filmmaking, and I think that's like this movie would not have been made 6 or 7 years ago.
No, probably not. No.
Right?
No, I think it would have. No, I think it would.
I mean, like if you look at like the wave of Black movies kind of started like 6 or 7 years ago, right? 2017, 18, I want to say. Yeah. And back then it was a lot. Yeah. It had a different vibe.
Do
It
we mean
was
in
it
terms of
was
the subject matter or just the way that it was?
subject matter, style, tone, target audience, everything. It was more about an act of activism as opposed to just being a movie.
Oh, okay, I see.
That right? You know what I mean? Like, and this is genuinely a movie. This
Yeah,
is
yeah.
not a statement. This is a movie.
No, no.
There has statements in it, but it's you can enjoy it as a movie.
Okay, I get what you mean. Yeah, yeah.
And that's what I was missing, like 2016, 17, 18, like thereabouts. And I'm glad this stuff is coming out now, and I want more of it.
Or the last thoughts.
This is a wonderful movie, man. This was such a great experience. Like, honestly, I fell in love with the story, fell in love with the characters, fell in love with the world as well. I do feel like the horror elements, and I know we probably didn't touch too much on the action in this, but I do feel like the horror elements were maybe a little bit understated. I actually feel like the best horror was in the opening couple of minutes of the movie, where Sammy's character is going into the church and it like has flashes to the vampires and the evil that's there. I felt like that was when I was like, oh, like first kind of like taken by the movie, and not so much in other parts of the movie, but I just felt like it was just all super compelling. Even that, I know we didn't touch too much on like the whole sort of barn scene once they kind of like figure out that they're vampires and they're trying to sort of figure out what to do, how to play it out, etc. What do they do about the people that have been locked out? People that they love us on the outside. How do you react to that? And this and the other. I just felt like the whole dynamic in there was great. This is why you don't welcome. No, I'm joking. I'm not going to say that. But you see what happens when you have other cultures in the room. She completely sold out everyone. I can't remember what her name is. What's the Chinese woman's name or the Asian woman's name in this? Grace
Grace.
completely sold out everyone. I was so mad. I was so mad. I was like, someone needed to knock her out. Like, someone needed to just like knock her out, put her to sleep or whatever. But all of that was great. There was like so many great moments, so many good laughs, so many genuine laughs as well. Like, I don't often laugh out loud. I'm like quite oh, that was like amusing or whatever like that. But no, there was actually like points in this where I was actually like laughing out loud as well. So yeah, hit all the boxes for me. This is very much a 9 out of 10 for me.
There's not really much to say. I think I've said everything. I had a great time with this film, and it's definitely looking like the best film of 2025 so far. The symbolism, the messaging, and obviously it's definitely, aroused a lot of conversation around the subject matters, which I'll be watching the film again to see if my suspicions are correct. If my suspicions are correct, then damn, hopefully they're not going to be correct. But however, overall, I think, like I said, I had a great time. This film is definitely a classic. It will go down as a classic in my book. And I'm giving this one a 9 out of 10 as well.
Yeah, I think this is a great movie. Just on a filmmaking level, it's pretty great. It just pretty much lands all of the notes. I've got a few smaller reservations in just exactly how the story is actually told, but overall, this is just heads and shoulders above everything else that's come out this year. So it's a 5 out of 6.
All right, guys, thank you very much for tuning into this week's discussion.
If you reached this part of the episode, thank you very much for locking in with us and tuning into our discussion. Of course, if you liked everything you heard up until this point, tell a friend. And if you hated everything you heard and you thought we were chatting a bunch of nonsense, tell an enemy. We are the Eye of the Storm podcast.
Thank you, guys, and we will catch you next week. Au revoir.
Bye bye.